All right, so back on our subject, and this you will find this in the textbook or the book if you bought it and are reading it. They talk about amoeba, and again, I'll always put it like in quotations, the simple cell of a living organism. Talk about this is well known in all circles, but both atheistic, materialistic, and Christian, and whatever other denomination or belief system there might be out there. A simple cell. We all probably picked up some water from the pond and put it under a microscope when we were in school or something like that, and looked at these little things swimming around and go, wow, okay. A simple little cell is, and you can only look a little bit into the complexity of it with a ocular microscope, or a 10x or a 50x or whatever microscope. But it contains, that simple cell in its own DNA contains more than 1,000 encyclopedias worth of information, assuming you probably got a 300-page volume, so you got a huge amount of information. 1,000 encyclopedias of, say, 300 pages each, with specific information. It's not simply random letters in this DNA code. It's actually super, super specific. So in other words, that book of the amoeba, or encyclopedia of 1,000-volume set of encyclopedias, has to be cover to cover precisely right, or the amoeba dies, or would never have come to life in the first place. Every single character, no typos, perfect order, perfect sequencing. Everything has to be absolutely right for that simple life form to exist. Okay, that's a lot of information. That's a lot of precision that's required for life to come into existence or to continue to exist. So even simple messages like take out the trash, right? All around us result in a conclusion that intelligent source authored that phrase, then we rightly conclude that much more complex message coded into every DNA molecule in every living thing must have come from an intelligent source. In fact, the source would be supremely intelligent, since we have been studying the DNA molecule for decades and have only partially discovered the total information that it contains, right? I mentioned that, right? So when they did the Human Genome Project, they mapped about 7% of it, left off about 93% of it. And what they've been finding ever since is, we shouldn't have left those parts out. That's actually not junk. And they go find more. Oh, no, that actually had a purpose. We thought it was, residual, dormant, no longer needed. And they keep finding more and more and more and more information in our own DNA that is so super important to the functions of the body and the living system that we have. So that ought to immediately leave you suspect when they say that a chimpanzee and a human DNA are 99.1% similar or whatever. Not even close. They don't even understand. They've only looked at 7% of human DNA, or maybe 9% by now or something. They only looked at about 9%, and they're making this big, broad claim humans and chimpanzees have the same DNA sequence with just a small, teeny little variation. Well, I don't mind telling you how they came to that conclusion. First off, is by their own presuppositions supported by their own facts or their invented facts. But what they did when they did all this, seeing a geneticist and a biologist give us the description of all of this, right? What they did is there's no way they're going to spend billions of dollars and hire hundreds of scientists to map a chimpanzee DNA, right? No way. So they did it once with humans, and they did about 7% of it. And then they looked through the human, or they actually took a chimp DNA, and they just looked for patterns, kind of, maybe visual or whatever, something they could understand mathematically, patterns. And they took a little chunk of chimpanzee DNA, and then they went and compared it to human DNA and said, oh, wow, look at that. We found something that looks very similar in humans to something in chimpanzees. And then they claim that because this is 99% similar, this one little fraction of a percent of DNA is so similar, well, humans and chimps are 99% similar. They ignored everything else. They came to the conclusion they wanted to come to. Not even close. And would you expect that an air-breathing, earth-dwelling mammal has some similarities in their DNA structure? Does it make sense that God or the Creator would use similar solutions to similar problems in similar functioning systems? Like breathing, well, if we're all breathing air, maybe we have very similar DNA to help us breathe air and develop our lungs. Okay. So, a little extra information for you there. So science, with all of its intellectual technology resources available, has never produced even the source material necessary for life. Now we can play with what God has given us. We can make modifications to DNA and all kinds of other things, but we can't create our own, right? We can take apples and make hybrids, or make a pear and an apple, or whatever, or a pluot, or plum and a apricot, or whatever. We can change what God has given us to play with. We can't create our own stuff. So we've never, with everything we have, we've never produced any of the source material that would be necessary for life. Certainly, science has never demonstrated the mechanisms for producing life from non-living materials, despite decades of trying to accomplish that very thing. We haven't even scratched the surface of trying to build these things from its component parts. Yeah. 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 Exactly. Right. If you're not familiar, or those online didn't hear that, talk about 1 Corinthians 3, where the foolishness of God is wiser than the wisdom of men. I mean, God is so much wiser, even in what we would deem foolish, if you will, like choosing fishermen to be the ones who carry his message for salvation rather than highly educated and influential scholars, right? The foolishness of God is far superior than all of the collective wisdom of men. So yeah, you're right. It does scream that kind of interpretation. Okay. So we can't even come close. We've been doing genetics and biological studies of things for decades or even longer, and we haven't even come close to being able to mimic it. So with all of our technology and all of our money and all of our wisdom, we're nothing close to creating life out of nothing, or out of raw materials. Why do we think that it happened by chance or accident? Doesn't seem to make sense. And again, going with the theme of the book, which requires more faith? God, an intelligent and all-powerful being, created, or it all sparked into life, even though we can't seem to spark it into life ourselves? So again, well, here we go. If all the collective intelligence of humanity has failed to produce life or its essential components, how rational is it to believe that unintelligent, unguided forces produce any aspect of any living system, as an atheist is required to postulate? It all happened without intelligence, all happened without design or purpose. Okay, so then in around page 120, they go into this just so theory. Now, you probably heard this, like this concept of God of the gaps. Oh, you Christians, you just fill in everything you're ignorant on with, oh, God did it, right? Well, how did the DNA come into this? Well, God did that. And, oh, God did that, as if it's not a valid explanation. But the atheistic, materialistic, secular, humanistic views have the very same appeals to ignorance, the very same just so kind of explanations for everything. So there's simply, if you look at it objectively, there's no evidence to support the evolutionary theory, despite every claim that you've ever heard for most of our lives since Darwin. All of us are younger than Darwin by a long shot. So there's no evidence, right? And in fact, Darwin himself, in his own Origin of Species book, said the fact there's no evidence should be the very reason why my theory is refuted. But he hopes that people will believe it anyway. And boy, did they latch on to that theory. Okay? So there's no evidence. And that's in terms of transitional forms, right? You might recall Darwin had postulated that the geological record with its fossils should be replete with far more transitional forms than completed whole healthy body plans, because you need to get from a reptile to a bird, or a fish to a reptile, or whatever, an amphibian, or whatever it is. And it should, all these almost got there. Oh, the snake grew some feathers, and it couldn't survive because feathers helped it in no particular way. But somehow it kept advancing, and we kept seeing the fossil record should be complete with all kinds of transitional forms. What we see is the exact opposite. From the very lowest layers, from the very beginning, we see fully complete, fully functional, non-transitional body plans in every aspect of the geological and fossil record that we see. There's no empirical observation. We can't go into a lab and start reproducing this stuff. Again, despite any of these claims that have been made, like we sparked life into existence, it's not even remotely close to reality. And no forensics, meaning the looking backwards in time, no forensics applied to reach a conclusion. These are just absolutely just so theories. They want us to believe, they want the world to believe, where I put my water, but they want us to believe, well, we say so, so please believe us. We want it to be true, so how about just believe us that it's true? That's a very different approach than saying, I believe Scripture, and God tells me that in the beginning there was nothing, and then he created the heavens and the earth. So, Bill, would you get me the water from that booth back there? Sorry. So they can only invent a story. There's only the story that is invented. It's consistent with their own biases, right? Imagine that. You have a story you want to tell, and you tell the story that's consistent with what you wanted it to say in the first place. And they want to convince us, thank you so much, that it's somehow true. But it's undeniable because life actually exists. We know life exists. We don't have to be an Immanuel Kant and say, there's no living things in this room. I mean, I see things. My mind wants me to think they're real and living, but, there's nothing real in this room. That's a whole different story, right? We see it, we see life, and we say, how did life get here? The most rational, reasonable explanation is something, someone, or God decided, I'd like to fill this planet with life, and had the power and intelligence and ability to accomplish that. Or we can appeal to chances and accidents and long periods of time and all kinds of other issues. We really would refer to it, I think, accurately as secular pseudoscience, because it's characterized by too much speculation, chasing after too few supporting facts. It's not. There's not facts to support evolution. There's not facts to support a Big Bang. There's not facts to support any of their attempts to explain life. Yeah. Okay, another fraud in that one. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right. And intentionally filed down and an acid etch to make it look like it's something that it wasn't. So with every single one of these, Nebraska man, Neanderthal man, Peking man, Piltdown man, every single one of them has been proven to be either a misinterpretation of the bones themselves, but in most cases, outright deliberate fraud, right? Trying to create this perception that we found the missing link, we found some transitional form, and therefore all the scientists should bow down to the Darwinian proposals and reject God. And then they very quietly come back around and say, oh, Nebraska man? Sorry, that was fake. We'll just keep going. Many, 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 many fakes in all of that. So most of the ones you've ever heard of, if you look at it objectively and study it now, you'll find, oh yeah, it's already been admitted that the person who perpetrated the fraud admitted that they did something like file the tooth and etch it. So when top evolutionists have to resort to aliens to explain how life on our Earth came to be, you start to begin to understand just how complex life must actually be, or it was, if they're going to appeal to aliens, and they've abandoned Darwinian processes to get to life on this Earth. It screams, this is incredibly complex. It can't possibly happen by accident. I think I mentioned either last week or the week before, like Sir Fred Hoyle said, it's like the probability of a tornado sweeping through a junkyard and assembling a 747. It's just not possible. And so let's go to aliens, or let's go to multiverses. That'll get us there. because no one wants to, no, no one can challenge us that aliens don't exist, and no one can challenge us that a multiverse generator somewhere outside of our universe doesn't exist. They'll never be able to prove it doesn't, so why not say it does? Darwinists are clearly acting on blind faith with their spontaneous generation theories on the origin of life. Look, didn't Louis Pasteur prove that spontaneous generation was impossible like 200 years ago, right? Oh, fruit flies. They show up when you have bad fruit, and maggots show up when you had bad meat or whatever. Louis Pasteur. And so, wait a minute, if I seal off the environment, I can let that thing rot forever, and it never gets new life in it because I've sealed it off from the outside. You know, the reality is fruit flies show up because we can't see them, but they find the fruit, and then they multiply, and then suddenly we can see them, right? Spontaneous generation of life from non-life was disproven 200 years ago, and yet it's still appealed to by the mainstream secular scientists every single day. So the belief that life on Earth spontaneously arose from non-living matter is simply a matter of faith, blind faith, really, in the strict, what they call reductionism, meaning you can reduce everything down to a simple principle like chance and time and matter and energy all somehow coming to exist. So this is his quote. Sorry, I shouldn't interrupt. Herbert Yaki quoted this. The belief that life on Earth arose spontaneously from non-living matter is simply a matter of faith in strict reductionism and is based entirely on ideology. He's a physicist and information scientist, okay, and not a Christian as far as I'm aware. Conversely, creationists and intelligent design proponents are simply making rational inference from the evidence which leads to an intelligent cause for the intelligent effect of having life on Earth. That's rational. That's reasonable. Okay? We propose all intelligence requires an intelligent source. Therefore, we see intelligent beings on Earth. It must have come from an intelligence from outside of us, right? So all this information, these thousands of encyclopedias worth of information in a single amoeba's DNA, that information had to come from somewhere. It had to come from an intelligent source. Why not claim that intelligent source is who he says he is? Now, we haven't put, like in the book, the flow of the book, if we're going to appeal to a intelligence and a creator and a designer and all of these kind of nebulous terms, we've gotten nowhere close to the God of the Bible and nowhere close to Christianity. We're just simply evaluating, can science give us a rational, reasonable explanation for existence of anything, including intelligence, or is the best, most rational conclusion it came from an intelligent source? Okay, we don't know who, where, what, whatever. It's what seems to be the most one. Now, again, you say, well, scientists say the intelligent source was aliens. But they're really just, alien God is just a substitution of the same thing. They're saying that this alien had the power and intelligence and ability to create the incredibly complex life on Earth. Well, from our perspective, they would be God. I mean, we can't do it. We've been spending decades with billions of dollars of money and technology. We can't do it. Those aliens must be really smart. Those aliens must be really powerful. Way more powerful. Way more intelligent than we are. How is that not God? Right? I mean, we're hoping, we're calling them an alien because we don't really want to be accountable to them when we stand before this being, when we finish our days on Earth. But it's got to be God, because the aliens would have to be, I mean, not orders, many, many, many orders of magnitude more powerful, more intelligent, more purposeful than we are to create this, what we see on this planet. So materialism, or good science versus bad science. Materialism, even without any rational evidence, must be protected by atheists as the only mechanism for explaining the existence of anything, for they cannot allow a divine foot in the door of explaining life. Okay? That's their own statements, that's their own quotes. They will not allow a divine foot in the door. He's always excluded, so we always look for some other explanation other than God. And that is both philosophical for them and very, very, very pragmatic. If you are a scientist and you are funded by grants and other types of funding resources at universities or research centers or whatever it may be, if you proudly proclaim, I believe in God, and he's the reason for these explanations, all of your funding sources will dry up and you will no longer be a scientist working in that field. That's almost guaranteed. Okay? They will cut you off. They will chastise you. They will rebuke you. You won't publish papers in magazine, in your peer-reviewed journals and all of that. They will cut it off. And most scientists, if you ask them, they'll tell you, yeah, I could never come out and say that I was a Christian. Now we have some Christian scientific, I want to say Christian scientists, I want to, creationists or Christians who engage in scientific disciplines. We have many PhD Christians and working in science, all kinds of scientific fields, but they typically won't survive in a secular university or a secular scientific research facility. They'll get cut off and have no ability to provide a living for themselves. So they keep going and perpetuating the same lies, even though many of them know it can't possibly be true. So Darwinian materialism is a false religious philosophy. It's disguised as science. If you get nothing else out of these early chapters of the book of I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist, get that. It's a religious philosophy that is disguised as actual science. Again, find a way to separate objective facts from subjective statements about the facts. And then they give time and chance a chance. Kind of their funny little quote here. Again, saying, oh gosh, if anything is possible. And you've heard the monkey and the typewriter, right? And that's the other half of the William Paley watchmaker argument. If you put 100 monkeys in a room filled with unlimited typewriters and unlimited paper, they will sit there and type out eventually over eons of time all the works of Shakespeare and the Bible and all scientific journals. They'll just keep typing away, accidentally typing out everything. Okay, not true in multiple ways, because first off, you need some kind of arbitrator to say, you type something good. I need to select that away so that it can preserve what's good and still reject the bad. You need something to kind of make a decision as to what's good and what's bad. But unfortunately, it's even worse for them because what we're talking about is not just benign ink going onto paper. They're trying to build life. And so when they get it wrong, it's not just, it would kill the monkey. Okay, it goes backwards. It's a destructive process. And so the whole monkeys and typewriters argument is just not even a viable explanation. So adding more time does not produce actual results. It doesn't. In fact, it generally goes in the opposite direction. It makes spontaneous generation more challenging. Spontaneous generation, life from non-life, abiogenesis, whatever term you want to put on there. Okay, because of the second law of thermodynamics. If you remember, we talked about the second law of thermodynamics, that everything tends towards disorder. It's like the universe started ordered and complete and what we might call fully wound up. And everything since then is a reduction in order, moving towards complete chaos, not the other way around. Biology is the only field of science that tries to ignore the second law of thermodynamics because they need it to go the opposite direction. They need to go from chaos to order, but the second law of thermodynamics says, no, everything goes from order to disorder. Okay. So it increases it over long periods of time. Long periods of time are not helpful to the equation. They work really well on your math class. They work really well on a whiteboard. T equals infinity, and suddenly everything's possible. As we've already talked about, there is no such thing as infinity. In our universe, there is no such thing as infinity. And because life needs to build these compound blocks of life to keep building and building and building, time is actually destructive. Let's just assume you got a little ways. Well, the second law of thermodynamics will make sure that getting a little ways actually takes you right back to where you started. So the chance of correctly selecting, okay, this is where, so it's the probability of Darwinists want others to accept as scientific fact are astronomically or ridiculously small. So here's another analogy for you from science. Okay? The chance of selecting a single grain of sand in the Sahara Desert by randomness and then doing that same, selecting a single grain of sand in the Sahara Desert 3 times in a row, and that's the mathematical odds that have been calculated by Darwinists, not Christians, but secular scientists, to achieve spontaneous generation of a single protein molecule. That's not life. That's not even DNA. That's a single protein molecule. Then you need to get another 200 protein molecules to combine in a very specific order to approach the complex first life form coming from a source of non-intelligence. These numbers are so big, we can't comprehend it. How many grains of sand do you suppose are in the Sahara Desert? Billions upon billions upon billions, I'm sure, right? The odds of you going out there and finding one specific grain of sand, all the others are a death sentence. But you find one specific grain of sand, then we mix it all up again, and you find one specific grain of sand, it's 2 times in a row, and you mix it all up again, and you find that one specific grain of sand a 3rd time. That's effectively what it takes to get the first process started. Now you need to do 200 more of those in a row, never making a mistake, to get to the level of complexity in the first life form. It's impossible, right? I mean, any rational thinking human being would say that's impossible. Picking one grain of sand out of the Sahara Desert that's been specially identified, come on, that's absolutely impossible. It would never happen. You could have every single person on the planet for the last 6,000 years going and trying to pull that grain of sand in, and it's just simply not possible. But wait a minute, what if just by absolute happenstance they picked the right same grain of sand? Great. Now do it three times in a row. Now do it 200 times more. Not possible. And again, this isn't some Christian saying, "Oh, you secular scientists, you're so bullheaded, you won't." This is secular scientists saying it about themselves, their own chances of life coming into existence by chance. So, chance is not a legitimate cause of anything. It's simply a word to describe mathematical probabilities. But there's never a guarantee. If there was a guarantee that you could at least expect at one point in time, you go to the, slot machines are programmed for some type of repetitive winning, but you're going to blindly go out to the blackjack table, and you're not going to take any. You're going to take the 2 cards that were delivered to you, and you're going to take the mathematical probability that I'm going to put all of my life fortune on those 2 cards and hope I beat the house. Right? What's the odds of that happening? That's way better odds, I'm sure, than anything we're talking about here. It's just a word to describe probabilities. Like, maybe I should use a better example. Like flipping a coin. You can do the mathematical probabilities of flipping a coin and saying, I want to see what the mathematical probabilities are flipping a coin 100 times in a row and always getting heads. And it's, completely random. You know that the coin flipping mechanism and the coin itself are perfectly weighted so that heads or tails would come up equally, 50-50 every single time. You say, no, I want to get 100 in a row. You can say it's mathematically possible, right? Do you really think if you spent 1 billion years flipping a coin that could easily come up 50-50 heads or tails every time it's flipped, you would ever get to 100 in a row? It seems to me, while it's mathematically possible, it's simply impossible. Because the coin never knows what it flipped the last time, or the second to last time, or the third to last time. It just keeps coming up heads or tails every other time. It's supposed to be possible. Maybe you get 4, 5, 6 in a row. You're not going to get 100 in a row. I pretty much bank my reputation. You'll never get 100 coin flips in a row that are all the same. If it's set up to get it to, you can flip and get this a 50-50 chance every single time. So it's really the word chance is to cover ignorance. We don't know all the factors involved, so we're just going to throw our little magic wand at it and say time and chance solves our dilemma. That's all it's going to take. So if atheists don't know or refuse to admit all the factors and conditions that cause the first life to come into existence, really they should just admit it instead of using the word, well, it's possible by chance, to cover their ignorance. They should just say, we don't know. Life we need to get 200 amino acids all to line up in a specific order. We see that they are lined up in a specific order for the definition of life, and we don't know how it got there. Maybe someday we'll discover it, but to just say, well, anything's possible if you give enough time and chances, that's not possible, right? There's not enough atoms in the universe to account for these probabilities. Some of them, the number of atoms in the universe has been estimated to be 10 to the 80th, meaning a 10 with 80 zeros after it. That quote from Sir Fred Hoyle I told you about, with the 747 going through the junkyard, he calculated the probability of life, and he only got a small portion of it, 10 to the 40,000th power. That's way more atoms than there are in the universe. Way, 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 way more atoms than there are in the universe. And that's where he stopped and said the aliens must have done it, because it couldn't have happened by chance. So rather than admit ignorance, intelligence cause, they make their chance probabilities their God. That becomes the God for them, chance and probability, to which they place their faith. It's not based in science. It's not based in reality. It's simply not possible to get that level of chances to come out to anything like life. So science, it says, is a slave to philosophy, right? And as I said that, they're slave because they cannot escape this philosophical system. And generally speaking, they will lose their jobs and their funding if they even attempt to do so. So secular naturalism is a starting belief system that results in scientists ignoring empirically detectable scientific evidence for divine design. Again, they can't get a divine foot in the door, so he's never the cause. It's always something else, something far less likely, or even truly impossible. Again, that number, 10 to the 80th atoms in the universe, and 10 to the 40,000th power for even starting the building blocks of life, from Fred Hoyle. Scientists and mathematicians have determined that anything 10 to the 50th power or worse, 50 zeros after it, is considered a miracle, because it's so statistically unlikely that it really is not possible it would ever happen. And Sir Fred Hoyle, like I said, calculated 10 to the 40,000th power just to get a piece of life started, not the whole thing. So objective science is a source of truth, but it's not the only source of truth. I think we can find other sources of truth beyond what you can measure or test on a blackboard or in a laboratory or with a calculator. So objective science results in verifiable truths. Bad science advances bad philosophies, right? If you're doing bad science and you make a philosophical claim based on bad science, you're going to have a bad philosophy. Science cannot be done without philosophy. It's required as part of the process. So science requires the use of philosophical systems like logic and reasoning to discover truth, right? We've been looking at how do you do things, right? Whatever it was, Spencer is a man, or all men are mortal. Spencer's a man, therefore Spencer is mortal, right? This logical, you can't get to conclusions. You can't make scientific claims without having logic. As we said, that requires something beyond the material world. We need a mind to come up with that. So it can't be done without philosophy. Science requires these philosophical systems for these reasoning and truth discoveries. Philosophical assumptions always dramatically impact the conclusions. If you start out saying, I believe in Darwinian evolution, and I'm committed to that, you will never find a non-Darwinian evolution explanation. And of course, we need to come to this conclusion that science doesn't really say anything. Scientists make claims. People make claims. People are faulty. People make mistakes. People intentionally deceive other people because it gains them something that they want. Science doesn't claim anything. Scientists do. We need to remember, they're not gods and they're not priests. They're just people, and we have to weigh what they say with every level of skepticism we would view anything else with. Like you would view skepticism of a realtor who says, I can sell your house for 2 times what the market value is. Okay? I view your claim with skepticism, right? The same kind of thing with science. claiming that life can come from non-life requires a great deal more of an explanation than just because I said so. So materialism, though, makes reasoning impossible. Materialism, that only explanations for anything comes from from materialism in the universe, right? Matter. So specified complexity, messages again that carry meaning, like take out the trash, or like our DNA, cannot be explained by their material components. You can't take all those letters that make up the phrase, take out the trash, and explain anything by just looking at the individual letters. You need to actually read the phrase in context to understand what the intended meaning was. The letters themselves don't carry any specific meaning. You jumble them all up and you get something different. It's probably garbage or gobbledygook, right? It's not going to carry a message until intelligence comes along and puts every letter where it's supposed to be, or most of them, so you can actually read the intended content. Typos and things like that, our brain can usually figure out what it's supposed to mean. But just throwing a bunch of Scrabble tiles on the floor and saying, surely there's something important in that message that I just threw on the floor is absurd. Human thoughts and theories are not comprised of materials. We have thoughts and we have theories, and none of them are in a material state. So if life, the point of this is that if life is the result of material components, scientists could easily make new life by just putting the raw materials together. They could. They could just take a bunch of proteins, throw them into a blender, and wait for some new life form to pop out. Is that what they do? Has anybody ever done that? No, because it requires information, requires intelligence. Okay, the specific order of things matters for life to exist. And spiritual experiences could not and should not be dismissed as a merely psychological phenomenon. Secular scientists, Darwinian evolutionists, whatever you say, oh, you faith people, you just believe anything. You can't explain thousands of years of people having faith in a God who created them as just being a psychological phenomenon. Okay, there's more to it. And there's more to everything we do, including our own conclusions and thoughts and propositions that we make. So if materialism were true, reasoning would be impossible. Because we reason in our minds and we come to conclusions, good or bad, based on what's in our mind, not based on materialism. Therefore, materialism itself cannot be the true explanation for life. Reasoning requires faith in what is not yet known or provable. We have to okay, reasoning. I'm going to reason something. Okay, and I'm going to reason, and it requires faith in what is not yet known or provable. Like, it's still dark outside, and the ground may still be covered in snow. I can't see outside right now, but I can postulate, I can speculate that because of the hour and because of the weather, it's probably still dark outside and there's still snow on the ground tonight. And now I can go, how do I do it? I can go prove it is by walking outside and testing my hypothesis. Okay. So two possible sources for reasoning. Pre-existing intelligence that gave us the capacity to engage in logical thought and reasoning. Or the other option is mindless chemicals, which offer no capacity for reasoning, which seems more of a better explanation for the reason why we as human beings are using the gray matter in our skulls to think about things. Is it because someone gave us the capacity to think about things, or because chemicals just decided that thought is something that could be added to the human existence? What's more rational? Our thoughts came from one who decided for us to think. So Darwinianists have the wrong box top of life, the wrong worldview. If all the pieces, right, we're back to the box top analogy. So if all the pieces of the worldview that we can actually verify, test, rationally think about by truth and logic and reasoning don't fit with this materialistic Darwinian worldview, then we should just be able to make a conclusion we have the wrong worldview, or Darwinianism is the wrong worldview. Materialism is the wrong worldview. Selecting the right box tops of life is really not a matter of preference or taste. We don't get to say, well, You like chocolate, I like strawberry. So you like God, I like materialism. That doesn't get us to the right answer as to how we're here, why we're here, and how you can explain the existence of anything in this life. Okay. So Darwinians have the wrong box top. I think that's the conclusion of this chapter or this section. Darwinian evolution is the wrong box top. We can't get to life from non-life through their processes. And by their own admission, and by their own statements of not having the ability to make all of these complex, compounded probabilities somehow all align perfectly to get even the first life. That doesn't even begin to explain how a single cell amoeba turned into a human being over 400 million years or whatever the time count is. So the most rational thing we can do is to rule out, or to recognize that ruling out theism has proven to be both bad philosophy and bad science. The discoverable truths in the world that we live in clearly leads to a theistic worldview box top. Hopefully this section helps to confirm that for you. Okay, that the answers of materialists and secularists and Darwinianists does not really account for who we are and how we got here. Okay, and so we should, by necessity, reject those views. They simply don't explain it. Let me give you a little bit more. That's basically the end of our notes here. I was going to show you a few other images. This is a picture of a cell. Now, when Darwin wrote his theory, he envisioned that the building blocks of life, a cell, which he had no knowledge of in terms of the interior workings of it, was just like protoplasm. Super simple, easily combined, and could just build up life. As I said, this cell is more complex than New York City's entire city management processes. Got all these different components, all these different parts, and they're all working in their own fashions to just to sustain life. Okay? Hugely complex. We still don't fully understand all the workings of a cell. It's super complex. You can't see the words on the screen, but you can see it's incredibly complex. Right? Every cell of every living thing is in that basic category. The DNA molecule, incredibly complex, right? This fills in these thousands of volumes of encyclopedias worth of information telling us how to build a nose, how to build eyes, how to build brains, how to build, the capacity to process oxygen and food, and how to have reproduction within the species that we live in or the kind that we are. All that information is contained in our DNA. From the moment of fertilization, by the way, sperm and egg come together like in a human reproductive system. All that information to build every aspect of that human being is present at the moment of fertilization. Okay. Talk about proteins. DNA is made of protein. It's the basics of every aspect of life. Okay, and they're not just that DNA and that protein is not just like this sequence. Like we talked about, like 200 chains long. It actually gets folded on top of itself. Okay, and it's the most efficient data storage system man has ever even envisioned, because it reads forwards and backwards and up and down, and then it folds on top of itself, and those folds continue to use the same letters in the sequence to give new instructions through the folding. So as you see on the screen on the left, toxic. If it's misfolded, you get toxicity with the protein. Here's what it looks like unfolded. Well, it's purposeless. It has no value to the living system if it's unfolded. Folded becomes functional. And there's what a protein, the DNA and the molecules and all that begin to build into this functional protein. It's incredibly complex. Mankind can't devise a storage system for our computers and technology that's anywhere close to the density level and efficiency level of the DNA. And that happened by accident, right? No? Okay. Here's just the plasma membrane of a cell. Every cell of our body, it's got to let stuff in, it's got to let stuff out, it's got to protect all of the internal components of the cell. That cell membrane is super easy, right? There's nothing complex about it. It's just a little teeny, like, whatever, something that keeps the cell protected. No. Without the cell membrane, the cell would die, would have no capacity for life. It's super easy, right, to build a cell membrane. Okay. Here's a picture of our cardiovascular system. You can look at that and say, oh, that's super easy to build. Obviously, it could happen by accident. And any explosion could produce the human cardiovascular system, right? Trial and error, lots and lots, billions of years of time could easily, eventually produce the human cardiovascular system, which feeds energy and nutrients to every cell in our body. And without that, we don't have a body and we don't have a life. So, this is what explosions look like. Accidents, randomness looks like. Does that look anything like what we've seen? Okay. How many of you have heard of the golden ratio? Anybody heard the golden ratio? It goes by a couple of different names, but apparently it's 1 plus the square root of 5, and that's that product divided by 2. Mean anything to you? No, not yet. Let me show you why they call it the golden ratio. Because it's really a measure of attractiveness and beauty in many ways. And this concept of the mathematical principles behind it are seen everywhere when you look for them. Man can do it like with the Eiffel Tower, but it's seen, as you can see, in like the rose petal. It's seen in the Milky Way galaxy, these ratios. It's seen in the ratios of our arm, our fingers, and you see that on the screen? Okay. The golden ratio seems to appear there. It appears in certain sea creatures, these golden ratios, all of that little structure, that little 1 plus the square root of 5 divided by 2, seen everywhere. Here's more. Golden ratio. Mathematical properties that represent both beauty and creation by non-randomness. Okay, you've heard, what's it, the Nautilus shell there in the upper left? Okay, constant over and over and over again of this. Sometimes I think it's referred to also as the Fibonacci sequence, but it's the golden ratio. You see it all over the place. You even see it in the human face, in multiple ways of the human face. The golden ratio of our ears, of our eye to nose ratio, our mouth and chin ratio, our forehead ratio. The golden ratio seems to be everywhere. There's a bigger picture of the Nautilus. Okay. Let me go back to that specifically. I think, it's 1. So in a parentheses, right? So you get the product first. 1 plus the square root of 5 divided by 2 is called this golden ratio. And then, as you see, like in the Nautilus here, every one of those chambers of the Nautilus follows that mathematical formula. Yeah, that's also in a hurricane forming, right? So let's go back to that. So you see the Nautilus has this ratio, a galaxy has this ratio. I can't remember what kind of sea creature that is, but a hurricane has that ratio, a sunflower has that ratio, a regular, I think, mollusk here, shell has that ratio. People, mathematicians and scientists pick up things all around the universe and they go, gosh, it has the same exact sequence over and over and over and over again. That's all accident, right? All of these different things just decided the golden ratio is the way to build things. Well, but things don't decide for themselves. Thoughtless, mindless things don't make decisions. Something has decided that this is how he wants beauty to be represented in the world. Do you see that? And you can find, you go ahead, Google on your own. You'll Google the golden ratio, Fibonacci sequence, look for images and pictures. You'll see just hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of examples in creation that match this exact mathematical principle or formula. Why? If it's all a world of randomness and accident and chance and time, why? Well, I had a couple of short little YouTube, well, not entirely short, but a couple short little YouTube videos I was going to show you. It's in the notes. You're welcome to go look at those on your own. One, well, I'll just say one is on the bacterial flagellum. That's a one that Michael Behe really focused on about 25 years ago or more. This design structure of the rotor and the stator and all of that that propels the bacterial flagellum through its watery environment or liquid environment. Really interesting little video there. There's lots of different ones you could watch if you just Google bacterial flagellum. And then this DNA animation, this video, there's not, actually this video doesn't have any words in it. It just shows you. Watch how DNA interacts with itself in the cell in this video. It's absolutely mind-boggling. So if I had time, I'd show it to you tonight. Can't show it to people online, but you can look at it online if you're looking at the notes, or you can do this on your own if you want to take a look at it. Really just, I think, very impressive, shows, screams there is a designer who built the designs of the world that we live in. So with that, I will let you guys all go and meet you next week or Sunday or whatever works.